former Health Secretary Steve Barclay has told junior doctors to call off their strike action, calling them politically motivated. This comes as junior doctors continue their longest ever strike action as the NHS continues to struggle with winter pressures.
It's reported that junior doctors have walked away from the negotiation table, demanding a 35% wage increase, with the British Medical Association, the union representing those doctors, seeking what they call a more credible offer.
So to discuss this further, we're joined by the chair of the BMA's North Thames Committee, Dr. Arjun Singh. Arjun, thank you very much for joining me. Striking doctors are, well, NHS bosses are pleading with junior doctors to get back in those hospitals. We've had critical incidents announced in Nottingham. Hospitals are under acute pressure. Why are junior doctors not returning to work when patients' lives are clearly at risk?
So there's a few things to say in terms of the derogations and the critical incidents. We have an agreed process with NHS England, and we meet with them 4 times a day to discuss patient safety matters. And we actually agreed the derogation process before the first set of strikes. And it requires openness, it requires honesty, and it requires trust to have exhausted all possible options before calling for derogations, because they are, of course, a last-minute resort. So that includes reallocating staffing, incentivizing alternative staffing. What we've seen, though, is that trust this time round in these set of strikes have not given us that evidence, and we make evidence-based decisions. So now we are being forced to reject derogations that are inappropriate. And we've seen this. We've seen trusts that are requesting derogations predated to the 29th of December. Now, by the very nature of a derogation, it can't be pre-planned. That's ridiculous. And we're seeing from consultants up and down the country saying that their staff are completely fine and they don't need derogations. So we would implore NHS England to use the process that we've already agreed to and that they've managed to use fine for the last 8 strikes.
Dr. Singh, some people might be raising an eyebrow at this idea that you can't perhaps schedule in a derogation, given that this is the busiest week that the NHS focuses on each year. Each year we know the first week in January is when there is the most acute critical pressure on NHS services. No wonder that's the reason why your union has chosen to strike over these 6 days, because that's when it pinches the hardest. That's when it will make the biggest political impact. Why then are you refusing some of these derogations?
So you missed a very key point with what I said. I said that we require evidence that trust has exhausted all possible options. If trusts are not providing us with that information, then we can't make a clear decision. It's like someone telling me to operate on someone that's broken their pelvis and then not allowing me to examine the patient or do any scans. It's ridiculous.
I'm sorry.
Give us the evidence and we can make a decision.
I'm sorry, Doctor, but your union is playing with people's lives here. We've seen tens of thousands of appointments cancelled, 1 million appointments cancelled over the past year of strike action. Do you not sometimes look at the actions of your union and think, hang on a minute, maybe this isn't the kind and thoughtful thing to be doing? You're a doctor, after all.
So we've opened the door to the government, we always have, and we've said that a credible offer is all that it would take for us to call off these strikes. The government has responded and said they will not negotiate with us during strike action. Now, that is a rule that they've imposed themselves. And more importantly, it's a rule they don't follow. With the criminal barristers, they negotiated during strikes. In Scotland, they negotiated with the doctors whilst they had strike action called. And more importantly, we have seen what happens with the nurses. We've learned our lesson. The nurses had a deal that they rejected but was imposed upon them because they couldn't renew their mandate for strike action.
Well, they didn't meet the threshold. Dr. Arjun Singh, the nurses didn't meet the democratic threshold to carry through another strike. If they really wanted to strike, if they really wanted to reject that offer, they could have voted to strike again, and they didn't.
Again, you're missing the point entirely. I said that without strikes being called, the government will not negotiate. And we've seen with the nurses who are asking for negotiations, yet the government is rebuffing them at every attempt, and they have no leverage because they can't.
Is there not an issue here where we're talking about the nurses as one group? And very often with unions, what happens is that there's a leadership that believes one thing and a membership that might not be as politically motivated. And with the nurses, they did not get that key threshold. They only needed half of the membership to vote for it, to turn out to vote for it, and they didn't receive that, perhaps because, unlike what the leadership of these unions say, the majority of nurses, maybe even the majority of doctors, don't think that it's a reasonable thing to demand of taxpayers for a 35% pay increase.
So, Tom, in my pocket, I have a mobile phone with the numbers of 60,000 doctors from up and down the country. I'm sure you're aware that our mandate for strike action is a world record, modern-day mandate, and we did it back-to-back, and consultants did it as well. Doctors do want to go on strike. That's why 98% of them voted for strike action. This isn't a political strike. I can't quite comprehend this kind of thinking. This is a strike because we want to get paid more, simply because we're not going to be able to retain staff unless we get a credible offer. And no one has been able to give us a solution to the retention crisis or the government's intransigence when they're not going to negotiate during strike action. It's completely illogical.
And you're happy to risk patients' lives to do so. A lot of people simply will not see that as being the best thing for the NHS at all. I can't quite get my head around why, when so many NHS trusts are pleading with doctors to come back to the hospitals, that you simply refuse at this point in the winter, when there will be patients and families up and down the country who are desperately worried, desperately concerned that potentially lives could be lost, that they've been waiting months for appointments and for surgeries and so on, and just to be told that they're cancelled.
Well, I suppose we should probably end on one question, which is, we know that we're probably not going to see 35% offered. The government has offered 10.3% for first-year doctors, an average of 8.8% for doctors. What sort of ballpark would you look for to end this sort of strike action?
Well, you mentioned a very good point. We're not asking for 35% in one go. So we're asking for something that would go towards pay restoration. Of course, I'm not going to negotiate live on air, but what I will say is that the Health Secretary has told us that she's got a credible offer waiting for us, and I'll take her for her word. I believe that it must be a credible offer because that's what she said. So if she's got a credible offer, give it to us. Go on TV, go on social media, tell us what it is, pick up the phone, and if it is credible, as they say, we will call off the strikes right now. We will never strike again.
Well, that's a bold proposition. I hope we can hear from the Health Secretary in not too long time. But for now, Dr. Arjun Singh, Chair of the BMA's North Thames Committee, thank you very much for joining us and putting across your case.
Oh, sorry, got a bit emotional there. I'm very worried for people up and down the country who aren't going to be able to see a doctor. But there you go. Let us know what you think.
There is the point of view that there are doctors leaving, that there is some sort of ground to be found. I think many people would agree that perhaps the way that the BMA has gone about it might be a little intransigent, but there you go.